Hey everyone, this is Olga, People of Substance by LemonSkies, and my guest today is Kelley Hecht. So Kelley is with Amazon Web Services for nonprofits, which we'll get into in a second. She lives in New York, and we've been on periphery of each other for probably at least a decade, and we kept missing each other, and we're finally talking. So I'm just excited and thrilled to have you here, Kelley.
Me too. I feel like one I'm following in big shoes because I've been watching and listening to all your previous guests, many of whom I look up to with aspiration. And I just love the conversations you facilitate. So it is such a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for being here. And I was just sharing with Kelley that no, I don't edit this because I lack the aptitude to actually edit. So these are truly natural, organic conversations as they
Yeah.
unfold.
Careful what we say.
Yes, yes. If we drop an F-bomb, it's going live. So Kelley, first question for you, and I know people ask you this all the time. What is it that you do? Like Amazon Web Services for nonprofits. It would be just really illuminating to understand what you do.
Sure. So I explained it a little bit differently depending on who's asking, because I try to be thoughtful. But I think the easiest way to describe it is that Amazon Web Services provides capabilities across the globe to millions and millions of companies, right? So commonly known ones are Amazon.com, obviously, Netflix. Many people's banks are utilizing AWS capabilities. And what is unfortunately not as well known is that those same services are available to nonprofits. And they're strategically designed to help nonprofits with their business, which happens to be doing good in the world, but is the same capability. And what's really cool about it is that the way the cost structure works is advantageous for nonprofits. And so my world is really focused on helping nonprofits better understand what they can do in the world of technology to advance their missions. And it's a very fortunate job. I feel very lucky to get to do what I do all day, every day in the seat that I get to do it in.
So how did you end up where you are? Did you set out to be in nonprofit space?
I think I actually did. Sometimes you can't tell if the stories you have in your head are real or if you've manufactured them over time. But the story goes that when I was 16, I was coming to New York. I was living in the Bay Area with my family, and my mom had taken me on a trip to New York. And that the only thing on my list that I wanted to do when I was in New York was to visit the office of the American Cancer Society, which begs a lot of questions, right? Like, why was that the priority of a 16-year-old? But I do think that in some way, shape, or form, I knew I wanted to work in the sector. I don't know that I would have used that same language just because I'm not even sure that it existed in the way that it does today, that people set out to have careers in the industry the way we now get to. But yeah, I kind of think I did always know that I would do this type of work in some way, shape, or form.
So we talk a lot about nonprofits, and I often ask about trends, but I'm going to ask you a slightly different question because I see kind of information and content you share. So nonprofits are often talking about overhead, and we're talking about programmatic areas and fundraising trends. But if you could change something about nonprofit industry, that's one thing, what would it be?
Oof. That is a hard question.
I have really hard questions for you.
You
Because
really
I think you'd
do.
be up to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of them is I go back and forth a lot on the name of our industry, nonprofit. And there have been years where like I vowed not to use the term because it's not accurate. We do generate profits. We just use them differently. We reinvest them into the world and into our communities. And so there's times where I wonder if the moniker of nonprofit, while well-intended, is actually holding us back and is preventing us from being respected as business leaders and invested in as businesses, because we lack that sort of investment mindset that the rest of the commercial sector has.
Mhm.
And I think it's probably something in that area of reestablishing us as what we are, right? A
Mhm.
true force of strategic business prowess in the world, that today is responsible for like many of the human services and societal offerings that people don't even realize just how ingrained and dependent we are on so many of these organizations. So I would perhaps change something that allowed us to be honored and respected for the impact that these leaders are making more than sometimes it feels like they are today.
Well, and when we call it nonprofit, some of the recent conversations I've been seeing is also, well, shouldn't nonprofit just be run by volunteers? Well,
Yeah.
sure, if it's a little local pantry in your neighborhood, maybe. But if it's an enormous multi-million dollar endeavor to invest in scientific research, probably not volunteer run. Probably needs to be more professionalized or
Yeah. And I think to that effect, we need all the things, right? We need skilled professionals, we need volunteers, we need supporters. The nature of the sector requires and has a lot of interdependence between those groups. And to your point, I mean, when I was working at the American Cancer Society, it was $1 billion organization. I mean, you want a certain level of professional acumen running your finances and running your mission delivery and running your IT systems when you are that level of organization. So I do think we're making strides. I mean, when I started in this sector, you could not get a master's degree, you could not
right.
get an undergraduate degree. It was not honored as a formidable career the
Right.
way that I do think it is today. And I think the cross pollination of people from the nonprofit sector going to the commercial sector and people from the commercial sector coming into the nonprofit sector is probably helping that. So I think we'll continue to become more and more respected in that way. And candidly, what's kind of cool in this exact moment, the nonprofit sector is actually leading in a couple of ways, particularly in tech, that I think would surprise people. And so I kind of love that because we always refer to ourselves. I hear a lot of people saying that the industry's laggards and we're always under resourced. And we sort of sometimes inadvertently have a victim mentality.
Mhm.
But there are a number of instances where we actually should stand proudly because we are forging incredible new innovative ground, and that's something to celebrate and be proud of.
It's that scarcity.
Well, get it into the possibility. We're moving there.
So you said that when I went to a school, there was no master's or undergrad in nonprofit studies either, and I'm not sure I would have chosen it. But what did you study?
I studied sociology,
Sociology.
and I'm not terribly proud of what I'll share, but the reality is I had gone to a huge school in the Midwest. I had done all the normal coursework the first 2 years, and I wanted to major in marketing. And there were two courses I had not taken as a freshman that were prerequisites, and as a junior, they wouldn't let me in. So I petitioned, I wrote letters, I met with the deans, they wouldn't let me in. So in the end, I actually chose sociology because it was the closest major I had at that point. I will say it's sort of funny in retrospect because when I look back on it, there is a lot more connection between the study of sociology and the work that I do today, but it was purely happenstance, not by design.
For sure, for sure. Well, in sociology, how it relates to marketing, right? Like
Yeah.
any of the Gladwell's books or any of those, it's all sociology.
Exactly. But to your point, I didn't make that connection at the time, and I'm a little bit like you. I don't know that had philanthropy been an option to me or nonprofit, that it would have been the path I've chosen. I don't know that I had the language at that point, and it's a great question. I'll have to give it some thought. I don't actually know what part of the work I was initially drawn to so vehemently, but it was pretty intense. I knew it was where I wanted to be.
See, I invite you in, we have a conversation, and really it's an excuse for soul searching.
Soul searching. Yeah, exactly.
So I think, Kelley, you've been working remotely most of your professional life. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's new for many people going back just a few years, but for you, it's been kind of traditional. And now there's a lot of discussion about remote work and kind of the flexibility and the benefits of work from home versus the benefits of returning to the office and being around colleagues and interacting with people. So where do you fall on that?
I fall in a surprising place to many, which is that I really do support a lot of the return to office efforts, with the caveat that I hope we have all learned and can create some grace and respect for the fact that people can be highly productive in a remote environment as well. Often the case in anything, a pendulum swings really far in one direction, really far in the opposite direction, and hopefully balances out in the middle. I hope that's where we are. There's a couple things I will say. When I was one of the anomalies being remote and most everyone else was in the office, the environment was very different than it is today where most people are remote. I've noticed an extended workday as far as hours of communication. People are communicating 24/7 now in a way that they didn't, even though technology made it possible. When people are coming to and from an office, or at least the majority of people were, there really were sort of bookends to the day. I hope we can get back to that. I think the world needs it. I also found that I was the one to adapt as opposed to everyone trying to adapt to each other, right? It was my responsibility as the remote employee to check in, to visit the office, to find out what was going on. It's a little harder to do when everyone's disparate. So those have changed. On the flip side, the persona that people used to, lie in their pajamas and not work all day, I think has solely been put to bed. And I think the grace for people to not have to take an entire day off work because they have a sick kid,
right,
or because they have a doctor's appointment themselves, right? Gives a little bit of flexibility that I hope we find that balance. But I do think there's real value in being in physical community. I think it's important for our professionalism, for our mental health. I think it's important to continue to learn from one another, because not everything we learn is in the head. Sometimes we learn by watching and observing and interacting. So I'm on the fence of balance.
Yeah, I feel strongly. And by the way, I hope everybody heard that Kelley is against pajamas. I am too, actually.
I am not the person who's ever worn pajamas, regardless of how many years I've worked remotely. That was never my uniform.
Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. But I think it's also with in-person time, it's redefining what that means, right? So there's a different way to be productive when you're around colleagues, and it's not necessarily knocking out deliverables out of the way. It's spending some of that time building trust and connection.
Yeah, it's a great point. I heard an interesting comment from someone the other day that sort of struck me. They said something to the effect of, like, I don't understand why my employer wants me to commute to the office. It's an hour on the train where I'm reading a book. If I stay at home, I could use that hour more productively. And I thought it was really interesting, because therein lies some of the discussion, right? Productivity isn't always about the output of your work. And I would suggest that actually sometimes finding some space to breathe and relax and take in a book can be really productive. It stimulates your mind differently. It opens your mind differently. And even if the book is a fictional novel, right? It doesn't matter. Those are important moments. So I think that we do need to sort of reconsider it. And it's not going to be a one size fits all. I think that's another thing. Your org structure, your mission, your team. I think we've really got to be thoughtful around how we approach this in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, sometimes unexpected sources of inspiration, or you're reading something or listening to something completely unrelated, and somehow it just clicks into place in unexpected ways.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've been living in New York. How long after graduation did you just kind of kept moving east?
Right away. Yeah. I was accidentally born on the wrong coast. I was born in California, but I was meant here. So here I am.
What's your favorite thing about living in New York?
The community.
The community.
Yeah, it's a beautifully rich, diverse, interesting, fascinating place. So I love that. I love that I know my neighbors. I love that I have a relationship with my deli guy that like I walk in, he knows me, he knows my kids. Um, I love the food. I just love it all. I love the energy of it. It's a place that works for me. Although there's a great quote, I think it's from an author named E.B. White that says about New York, if you can imagine living anywhere else, you probably should. And I think that's really good advice because I can't imagine living anywhere else. And yet I really do understand why most people choose to live somewhere else. It's not for the faint of heart, this place, but it works for me.
So outside of New York, what's the most unique, favorite, exciting place you've visited? Because you're a pretty good traveler,
I
from
like
what I
to
know.
travel. I don't know about exciting. I mean, my favorite place to be is Maine. I love Maine. It's just a beautiful spot in the world that gets really quiet. And I would say, actually, it's funny that you say that because if you had asked me my favorite place, I would have said Maine. But when you said exciting, I felt the need for like energy or something.
Mhm.
I think because I live in New York that has so much energy all the time, when I travel, I love the sort of stillness and quiet of a place.
Mhm.
Um, so Maine is a really, really special place and will always be.
I'm planning a trip in June, so I may be reaching out. It's been
Please do.
probably a solid decade since I've been there. So
The beauty is it probably hasn't changed that much, which is one of the things I love about it. It feels a little bit like a step into a world that had a different pace to it.
mhm,
Cool
mhm.
spot. I'm so excited you get to go.
I'm looking forward to it, especially since it gets very humid and well into 90s in Washington, D.C., DMV area. So,
Yeah.
another question I have for you. So, what are some hobbies that with the new year, a lot of people are starting to talk about in and out and resolutions and new things they're taking on. Are there any new things you're taking on or continuing with that are completely outside of your nonprofit world and, all the daily children related things
Yeah.
that you'd like to be doing?
I'm terrible at hobbies. I wish I had one. I've like, there've been years where I've like set out to find my hobby. But I really don't have a great one. And my hobbies are more just things that I do to spend my time. I mean, I love food, so I love to eat out. Part of why I live in New York as well. I used to run, but I busted my knee a little, so I'm on the sidelines of that one.
Mm.
But no, I don't have a great hobby. Do you have a hobby? Because
I do run.
you do.
I have a lot of hobbies that I pick up and drop off again and, kind of peaks and valleys, but running is pretty consistent.
I do. I do love to run, but it's hard. I meet these people that have like great passions and hobbies. I have a friend who's an artist, quite a few, or people that knit or crochet or rock climb. I'm not a hobby person.
I have very little patience for knitting and those types of things, but I do enjoy art. And actually, that was another thing I saw you sharing that you have an art collection. So
Uh,
I want to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's fun. I love that you call it an art collection. Thank you for honoring it that way. I have had people who've come into my life and they are artistic, and I'm drawn to them because I feel so unartistic in my being. But I'm just so blown away by someone with artistic talent, like the ability to pick up a pen or a paintbrush or
Mhm.
an instrument and have something coherent take place is just it's not the existence that I have. And so I've found that filling my home with that art is something that I really love. So I have probably close to a dozen pieces now. Um, some are paintings, some are sculptures, some are, mixed medium. The piece I posted about recently was from a young man that I know because he's friends with my daughter. And I had seen a piece of his art and I didn't know it was his. And I was just like blown away by this art. And when I found out it was his, I asked him to do a piece for me. And I just find it to be amazing. So for me, it's a little both. I love art in general, but I also love the sort of story behind each piece in my house. And I love the connection to the people who gave it to me.
Yeah, I have quite a few pieces around the house that I've picked up on travels and different places. So maybe we need to do a
Yeah.
virtual exhibit.
I was going to ask about the heart. Is that a heart behind you?
It is, yes. It's actually a lithograph that I picked up in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So we stumbled on this little shop that had all these prints. So, and I really like that one.
It's a good one. And I like the sort of symbolic nature of it too, given what we do and given what you focus on.
I feel seen. I really feel seen. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So let me wrap up with one question. You know, we talk about nonprofit leaders and nonprofit leadership. So instead of advice, I'm going to flip the equation a little bit here. And I consider you to be one of the leaders in our industry. What do nonprofit leaders tell themselves that's actually holding them back and prevents them from achieving greater things?
It is so hard. I don't know that I think they're telling themselves something that's holding them back. I really think nonprofit leaders are tasked with an unimaginable expectation. I have so much respect and so much empathy for the people doing this work and leading these charges. And I will also say that to me, leadership is not an org chart. It's a personality. I've seen some of the best leaders be on their, third week of a job in nonprofit. But I think when it comes down to what they're telling themselves, I don't know that they have the space and time to tell themselves anything. So it may be the absence of what they're telling themselves.
Yeah.
It may be that they are working so hard and with such commitment to the causes and the people internally and externally that they've signed up to serve, that they just don't have a minute to clear their heads and imagine the current reality or the future. Because I really do think they're taking a lot on. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. Yeah, they probably need to go to Maine and take a little break there. So
we need to go to Maine. We all need to go to Maine. That's the answer.
Maine, Kelley.
What'd you say?
Maybe we all retreat in Maine.
Let's all retreat in Maine. I love it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And it's lovely to meet you sort of in person, although I'm sure we've been in the same places.
If not, we will be this year. Conference season is starting up and we'll be there together. But seriously, Olga, thank you so much for always organizing these events and for keeping the conversation going in our space. It's such a nice thing when I log into LinkedIn and I see one of your videos up. I know that it's something that I will stop for the moment and spend some time listening to. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate having you here. Thanks, Kelley.
All right.